Every day, in the soft stillness of dawn, before the world woke to its ceaseless demands, a father would pause to watch his daughter sleeping. She was his light, his greatest pride, a tiny yet unbreakable promise of everything good in life. From the moment her little fingers wrapped around his, she had rewritten his every dream and purpose. Her presence had become the center of his world. Her laughter was the sweetest melody to him. Her tears a call he could never ignore. Every milestone she reached filled him with indescribable joy, and every stumble only made his love stronger, pushing him to be her unwavering guide. In her he saw a reflection of endless possibilities, the beauty of who she was, and the hope of who she could become. This was Kwami's love for Amma, or so it seemed. But love is complex, and life is often cruel. Behind the tender gazes and heartfelt promises lay a man caught in the grip of tradition, struggling with the weight of his beliefs and expectations. When Kwami discovered that Amma was living a life he could not understand, a life that clashed with everything he thought he knew, his love turned into something darker. Amma's courage to embrace her true self became the spark of an unimaginable tragedy. The man who once vowed to protect her became the one who ended her life, and in that single horrifying moment, time stopped for their family. In this episode of Forbidden Passion, we explore the life of Kwami, a father, a husband, and ultimately, a man broken by his own fears. What shaped his choices? How did the bonds of love and family unravel so completely? And what was the reaction of his wife, a woman caught between grief and disbelief? Welcome to Forbidden Passion. I'm so glad to have you here for another powerful story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Together, let's uncover the truth behind the pain. The 1980s in Ghana were a time of transformation and hope, a period that saw the country recovering from political upheaval and economic struggles. For Kwami, born in the small town of Takoradi, the 1980s represented a time of great personal promise and a deep sense of purpose. Raised in a devout Christian household, Kwami's parents, both teachers, instilled in him the importance of education and faith. They believed that with hard work and a steadfast belief in God, anything was possible. Kwami's family was not wealthy by material standards, but they were rich in faith and community. His father, a respected schoolteacher, often shared stories from the Bible with him, teaching him that life's greatest fulfillment could be found in service to others. His mother, a strong and loving woman, played a crucial role in ensuring that Kwami's education was as comprehensive as it could be, despite limited resources. Kwami attended the local primary school in Takoradi, where he was known for his academic excellence and his deep spiritual conviction. From an early age, he showed an aptitude for leadership, often found at the front of the classroom, organizing discussions and helping other students understand complex subjects. However, what truly set Kwami apart was his unwavering commitment to his Christian faith. The town of Takoradi, like many parts of Ghana at the time, was tightly knit by a blend of traditional values and Christian teachings. Sunday services were an integral part of the week, and the church played a central role in Kwami's life. His parents were active in the local congregation, and their home was often filled with visiting members of the church, all of whom spoke highly of Kwami's intelligence and spirituality. It was during these years that he developed a strong desire to one day serve as a pastor, a calling he felt deeply rooted in his heart. By the time Kwami reached secondary school, his academic prowess was evident to all. He received top marks in subjects like mathematics and literature, but it was his passion for the Bible and religious studies that truly defined him. While his peers focused on subjects that would lead to more conventional careers, Kwami spent countless hours poring over the scriptures, believing that his path lay in serving God and his community. In 1985, at the age of 19, Kwami made a bold decision. He would pursue a higher education in theology. This was not a typical path for many young men in his town, where most aspired to become doctors, engineers, or teachers. But Kwami was steadfast. He saw his future not in the riches of the world, but in the wealth of spiritual knowledge and leadership. His decision was met with some resistance, both from those who believed that his talents could be better used in more conventional professions, and from those who thought the challenges of studying abroad would be insurmountable. But Kwame, with the support of his parents, set his sights on a bigger dream, one that would take him far from home. In 1986, Kwame was awarded a scholarship to study theology at an esteemed seminary in the United States. The scholarship was a beacon of hope, not just for Kwame, but for his entire family. It was a sign that his hard work and faith were paying off. His parents, proud yet anxious, knew that this opportunity could change their son's life forever. They sent him off with blessings and prayers, knowing that this was the beginning of something monumental. When Kwame boarded the plane to the United States in the summer of 1986, he wasn't just leaving Ghana behind. He was embarking on a mission that would define the course of his life. He had always believed that God had a plan for him, and this move to the United States was just the first step toward fulfilling that divine purpose. He would study hard, learn from the best, and one day return to Ghana to serve as a pastor. The United States, a land of boundless opportunity, loomed before Kwame like an uncharted horizon. After a long transatlantic flight, the plane touched down in Chicago, an expansive, bustling city with towering skyscrapers and a pace of life that was far removed from the serene rhythms of Takoradi. The contrast was striking. Kwame had left behind the lush, rolling hills of his hometown for the concrete jungle of the American metropolis, where everything seemed larger, faster, and louder. Kwame stepped off the plane with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The first few moments in America were disorienting. He was overwhelmed by the language, the culture, and the sheer scale of the city. The streets were filled with people from all walks of life, and the noise of cars, buses, and people talking in every direction was a far cry from the calm and familiarity of Ghana. His scholarship had brought him to the seminary, a prestigious theological institution in the heart of Chicago. The opportunity to study here, to learn from renowned professors and mingle with students from all over the world, was a dream come true. Yet, despite his initial enthusiasm, Kwame couldn't shake the feeling of being a small fish in a vast ocean. He was far from home, surrounded by strangers, and he was forced to confront the reality of his new life in a foreign country. Kwame's arrival in Chicago was marked by both excitement and isolation. He had never experienced loneliness like this before. His family, friends, and the close-knit church community of Takoradi were thousands of miles away, and the warm, familiar sense of belonging he had known in Ghana was replaced with a feeling of disconnection. For the first time in his life, Kwame found himself grappling with what it meant to be alone. The large university campus where he studied theology was filled with students from every corner of the globe, but the cultural gaps seemed insurmountable. His accent, his attire, and his mannerisms set him apart. While many of the students were friendly, Kwame often felt like an outsider. His faith, deeply embedded in his Ghanaian roots, stood in contrast to the liberal ideas and lifestyles he encountered. The American way of life, with its emphasis on individualism and material success, was foreign to him. Despite this, Kwame was determined to succeed. His passion for theology remained unwavering, and he threw himself into his studies with an intensity and dedication that had defined him throughout his life. In the fall of 1990, just as Kwame was beginning to find his rhythm, he met Akosua. She was another Ghanaian student at the university, pursuing a degree in sociology. Akosua had arrived in the U.S. a year earlier and had quickly adjusted to life in America. She was confident, well-spoken, and had a deep sense of pride in her Ghanaian heritage. Akosua's warmth and kindness drew Kwame in, and they quickly became friends. Their shared background and values created an immediate bond. It wasn't long before their friendship blossomed into something more. They spent hours talking about their experiences as immigrants, their dreams for the future, and of course, their shared faith. In the years to come, this new life in America would serve as the foundation for everything that would follow. But little did Kwami know, the choices he made in these early years, his studies, his relationship with Akosua, and his struggle to maintain his cultural identity, would set the stage for a life filled with both blessings and unexpected turmoil. In the spring of 1992, after months of late-night study sessions and cultural adjustments, Kwame proposed to Akosua. The proposal was not just a romantic gesture, it was the culmination of their shared vision for the future. The proposal was simple, intimate, and heartfelt. The wedding plans came quickly after the engagement. They had always dreamed of a traditional Ghanaian wedding, a celebration that would honor their heritage and the values they held dear. However, with most of their family in Ghana and limited resources, they knew it would not be easy to replicate the large, elaborate weddings they had seen back home. The wedding took place in the summer of 1992 in a small church in Chicago. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with profound meaning. By 1994, Kwami and Akosua had settled into a life that was both fulfilling and busy. Their early years of marriage, marked by the challenges of studying and adjusting to life in America, had solidified their bond. Now, with Akosua completing her degree in sociology and Kwami finishing his studies at the seminary, they looked ahead to the next chapter of their lives. Akosua's pregnancy came as a joyful surprise. In the summer of 1994, the couple learned that they were expecting their first child. The news brought them an overwhelming sense of joy and anticipation. For both of them, the idea of becoming parents was a dream come true. In February of 1995, after months of preparation, Akosua gave birth to their first child, a healthy baby boy. They named him Kofi, a name that carried with it the legacy of their Ghanaian roots. The birth of Kofi was a joyous occasion for both families, though it was bittersweet for Kwame and Akosua that their relatives from Ghana could not be there to witness the moment. Still, they were surrounded by friends from the African community in Chicago, many of whom came to visit, bringing gifts and offering prayers for the newborn. For Kwame and Akosua, the birth of their son was a moment of immense pride and gratitude. Raising Kofi in the United States was not without its challenges. Kwame and Akosua were determined to raise their son with a strong sense of identity, despite the fact that he was growing up far from the cultural roots of Ghana. They made sure to speak to him in both English and Twi, the language spoken by their people in Takoradi. In 1997, after nearly 2 years of adjusting to life as parents, Akosua became pregnant with their second child. While they were excited to welcome a new addition to their family, they also felt the weight of responsibility. This would be another life to nurture, to raise with love and faith. The birth of their second son, Ni, added a new layer of joy and purpose to their lives. Ni's arrival was a source of great celebration. Amma's story begins in 1998, the year she was born, when her parents, Kwame and Akosua, were still basking in the joy of raising their 2 boys, Kofi and Ni. Amma, their first and only daughter, was the light they didn't know they were missing. Her arrival in their lives was as much a surprise as it was a blessing. A daughter was a dream for both Kwame and Akosua. From the start, Amma was a spirited child, different in some ways from her older brothers. Where Kofi was calm and introspective, and Ni full of energy and mischief, Amma was fiery and independent. She displayed a keen sense of curiosity from an early age, always eager to explore and ask questions. Her personality was already starting to form, and it was clear that she had inherited her parents' drive, but in her own unique way. As Amma grew older, however, she began to show signs of a personality that was both strong-willed and inquisitive. As Amma approached her school years, the realities of growing up as an immigrant child in America began to shape her life in unexpected ways. In 2004, when Amma was 6, her parents enrolled her in the local public school, where she would experience life outside the loving cocoon of her family. At first, school was an exciting new adventure, Amma quickly adapted to the classroom environment, eager to learn and make friends. Her teachers were impressed with her natural intelligence, and she became well-liked by her peers for her friendly and outgoing nature. But as she moved into elementary school, Amma began to experience the complexities of growing up in two different worlds. At home, she was surrounded by the familiar sounds of Ghanaian music, the traditional dishes Akosua prepared, and the rich teachings of their faith. But at school, she was often reminded of her differences. Her classmates, mostly white and from a variety of American backgrounds, sometimes made jokes about her accent or questioned her family's customs. Amma began to notice that she didn't always fit in. Though she had many friends, there was a subtle, sometimes unspoken divide between her and the others. At age 7, Amma was feeling the push and pull of her dual identity. She felt caught between the Ghanaian values instilled by her parents and the American lifestyle she saw around her. At home, the rules were strict. Her parents were devoted to raising their children with a strong sense of discipline, rooted in both their faith and the traditions of their homeland. They emphasized the importance of hard work, respect, and maintaining their cultural heritage. But outside of the home, things were different. Amma began to notice that many of her classmates didn't seem to follow the same rules. They wore what they wanted, stayed out late, and didn't have the same deep respect for authority that her parents instilled in her. While she was still a young child, these differences began to create a sense of confusion in Amma's mind. She wanted to be accepted, to fit in with her peers, but she didn't always know how to balance this desire with the expectations at home. Amma's relationship with her parents was becoming increasingly strained as she entered her preteen years. Kwami and Akosua, always deeply invested in her upbringing, tried their best to guide her through these challenging years. They took her to church regularly, hoping to reinforce the values they had taught her.
As we go into the most intense part of this video, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. It gives me motivation to create more videos. If you love this video and wish to see more, kindly subscribe.
But as Amma turned 10 in 2007, her desire to explore the world outside the comfort of her home became more pronounced. She was beginning to form her own ideas about who she was, what she wanted, and how she fit into the larger social landscape. Her friendship with the other girls at school, including a few who had started showing interest in new things like fashion, music, and the teenage culture of America, became stronger. It was in these relationships that Amma began to find a sense of belonging that she had been craving. They had always emphasized the importance of making wise choices and staying true to their Christian values. As she neared her preteens, they started noticing subtle changes in Amma's behavior. She was becoming more rebellious, more willing to challenge their authority. She began to question the rules of the house, often pushing back against her parents' requests, particularly when it came to her involvement in church activities or her adherence to their Ghanaian customs. Kwami and Akosua tried to guide her with love and patience, but it was clear that Amma was starting to push the boundaries in ways that made them uncomfortable. They saw this as a phase, a natural part of growing up. But the truth was that the seeds of a deeper rebellion were starting to take root. In 2007, Amma, now 9 years old, began attending a new school for middle school. It was here that she was first exposed to more diverse perspectives, new ideas about freedom, identity, and the growing influence of Western culture on teenagers. At first, she was fascinated by it. She made new friends, some of whom shared her interests, and began to feel a stronger sense of self. However, this new sense of self came at a cost. Amma's increasing curiosity about the world outside her family's teachings would soon lead her down a path that would challenge her faith, her relationship with her parents, and her identity as a young Ghanaian American woman. Though still very young, Amma was beginning to question everything she had once held as truth. She started to see the world through a new lens, one that was filled with both excitement and confusion. The environment at school offered a sharp contrast to the structure and discipline of her home life, and it was here that Amma began to question the rules and expectations set by her parents. Kwami and Akosua, sensing their daughter's growing independence, made a concerted effort to keep her grounded. They continued to insist on regular church attendance, and Kwami often spoke to her about the importance of family, respect, and faith in shaping her future. Akosua, who had always been a strong presence in her children's lives, encouraged Amma to embrace her heritage and be proud of where she came from. They both emphasized the importance of remaining true to God's teachings, the values they had embraced back in Ghana, and the discipline that came from being part of a Christian home. Yet, despite their best efforts, Amma was beginning to feel stifled by the weight of these expectations. While she still respected her parents and the culture they had built within their home, she started to grow resentful of the restrictions they placed on her. When Amma was 13, her rebellion escalated. The conflict between the girl her parents knew and the teenager she was becoming grew wider. She began sneaking out more often, spending less time at home, and attending parties or social gatherings where her parents wouldn't approve of the behavior. Despite their firm guidance, Amma was becoming increasingly defiant, pushing boundaries at every turn. Her behavior at home became erratic, sometimes sweet and loving, other times distant and cold. She argued with her parents more frequently, challenging their authority in ways she had never done before. Amma's growing disconnect from her parents was compounded by her increasing desire to belong to a social group outside of her family. The influences of her new friends, who were more liberal in their thinking, encouraged her to explore ideas that she had once been taught to reject. This period marked the beginning of a significant shift in Amma's worldview. She became more drawn to secular ideas about identity and self-expression, and slowly began to question the Christian faith that had once been the cornerstone of her life. She met a group of friends who were involved in what could be considered alternative lifestyles. Among this group was Lily, a girl Amma met through a mutual friend at school. Lily was a few years older, openly confident, and part of a growing subculture of students who identified with the LGBTQ+ community. This was an area that Amma had never considered before. She had been raised in a home where such topics were largely ignored or treated with disdain. However, Lily's easy confidence and the sense of belonging she offered Amma were alluring. They formed a bond, one that was based on their shared experiences as young women searching for their identities in a world that felt increasingly unwelcoming. Amma's relationship with Lily soon deepened, and she began to explore feelings and attractions that she had never discussed with anyone before. This marked a major shift in Amma's life. She began to question her own sexual identity. Influenced by her growing attachment to Lily and the beliefs she was developing outside of her family's religious framework, as her relationship with Lily grew stronger, Amma became more distant from her family. Her grades began to slip, and her behavior at home became more erratic. She would argue fiercely with her parents when they confronted her about her new friends and her changing attitudes. The once close-knit family began to fracture as Amma continued to push against the boundaries set by Kwami and Akosua. By 2011, Amma had fully embraced a new world that existed apart from the carefully structured life her parents had built for her. She was on the cusp of adolescence, and the path she had chosen was now taking her down a road that was both thrilling and dangerous. The choices she was making were no longer just about testing boundaries. They were about redefining her entire identity. When Amma was 14, she attended her first secret party. It was held at a friend's house, a fellow student who, like her, was exploring new aspects of identity and freedom. Amma had always been somewhat shy, but at the party she found herself caught up in the excitement of the night. There was music, dancing, and a sense of liberation that she had never felt before. She spent hours with Lily and the others, talking about everything from pop culture to the future. She found herself drawn to the conversations about identity, relationships, and the choices people made to define who they were. Amma had always been a curious soul, but now she was beginning to explore a side of herself she had never considered before. She began to question her sexuality and what it meant to love and be loved. Her feelings for Lily were undeniable, and the relationship began to take on a romantic dimension that was both exhilarating and frightening. Amma's behavior became increasingly erratic as she navigated these two worlds. At home, she was becoming more withdrawn. She began to spend more time in her room, often claiming to study or read. But in truth, she was on her phone, chatting with Lily or scrolling through social media, seeking validation from the virtual world that offered her a sense of belonging and affirmation. As 2012 drew to a close, Amma's hidden life was beginning to show cracks. The choices she was making in secret, the relationships she was nurturing away from her parents' prying eyes, would soon collide with the reality of her family's expectations, setting in motion a series of events that would forever alter the course of her life. The first noticeable change came in Amma's behavior at home. Once a bright, enthusiastic child with a strong sense of family pride, she had grown distant. Her smiles, once frequent at the dinner table or during family gatherings, were replaced with sullen expressions and an unspoken tension. She had always been respectful, albeit headstrong, but now there was an edge to her tone whenever her parents spoke to her. She began to argue over the smallest things: why she should go to church, why she should finish her homework before going out, why she couldn't hang out with certain friends. At first, these seemed like normal teenage defiance, but they were increasingly frequent and intense. In particular, Amma's resistance to attending church became a point of contention. The church had always been the foundation of the family's life, a place where they gathered, not only for spiritual nourishment, but to reinforce their cultural and familial bonds. But Amma began skipping services, often making excuses about homework, a need to study, or, more frequently, simply claiming she wasn't feeling well. This behavior did not go unnoticed by Kwami and Akosua, who, though concerned, tried not to push too hard, thinking that it might just be a phase. They had always been firm believers in grace and prayer, so they hoped that with time, Amma would return to the path of faith and discipline that they had worked so hard to instill in her. Amma and Lily spent more and more time together, often without the knowledge of her parents. They would text and chat for hours, and sometimes Amma would even sneak out to meet Lily in secret, hiding the truth from her parents with lies and elaborate excuses. Amma felt that her connection with Lily was something that her parents would never understand, and she feared their anger and disappointment. Lily represented a world of acceptance that Amma had never felt at home. She was openly confident about her sexuality, unapologetic in her desires, and most importantly, she didn't judge Amma. As much as Amma loved the closeness she shared with her, she knew it was a relationship she couldn't share with her parents, knowing it would be met with anger and confusion. But, despite Amma's best efforts to keep her new life hidden, some things started slipping through the cracks. Akosua, ever the vigilant mother, began to notice changes in Amma's behavior. She became increasingly secretive about her phone. Akosua had always trusted Amma with her personal belongings, but now the young girl would become defensive whenever Akosua picked up her phone or tried to see what she was up to online. Amma also began to spend hours alone in her room, retreating into the privacy of her own space, sometimes refusing to come out even for family meals. Her parents knew that this kind of withdrawal wasn't typical for their daughter. It seemed that something, or someone, was taking hold of Amma in a way they couldn't control. In addition to the emotional distance, Amma's academic performance began to slip. She had always been a bright student, proud of her grades and her place in school, but now her grades began to drop. She no longer seemed motivated to excel. Homework was left unfinished, and projects were put off until the last minute. For months, Kwami and Akosua had noticed the changes, but it wasn't until a single moment in early 2013 that they would be faced with an undeniable truth. It was a seemingly ordinary Sunday, and the family was sitting in their living room after church. Amma had been particularly distant that morning, her eyes clouded with what appeared to be frustration. As the family discussed the sermon over lunch, Amma barely contributed, only nodding absently and offering short answers when prompted. Kwami tried to engage her, but his daughter quickly excused herself and retreated to her room. Unbeknownst to them, Amma was slipping deeper into the world she had been concealing from her parents. Her relationship with Lily had intensified. What had started as a close friendship had evolved into a secret, forbidden romance, one that Amma knew her parents would never accept. Amma had been cautious up to this point, hiding her texts and phone calls, sneaking around to meet Lily at places where they couldn't be seen. But that Sunday, things changed. As Amma went to her room, she left her phone on the kitchen counter, charging unattended. Kwami, who had been growing more suspicious and increasingly concerned, noticed the phone and, on impulse, picked it up. He had never invaded his daughter's privacy before, but something inside him told him that he needed to know what was going on with her. His hands shook as he unlocked the phone, his heart racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. The phone revealed a trove of unsettling information. Text messages between Amma and Lily that made it clear their relationship had crossed a line. What was once a friendship had evolved into something far more intimate. The messages were filled with affectionate language, inside jokes, and private plans that clearly indicated the romantic and physical nature of their bond. Amma had been hiding her emotions, her desires, and her relationship from her parents, and these messages confirmed everything they had feared. In these texts, Amma expressed her deep affection for Lily, writing about how much she loved her and how they had spent time together in secret, sharing moments that were both tender and intimate. But it wasn't just the texts that struck Kwami with horror. It was a video that he stumbled upon in Amma's photo gallery. It was a video of Amma and Lily, filmed during one of their secret meetups. The footage, though blurry and shaky, was unmistakable. It showed Amma and Lily in an uncompromising situation, hugging, kissing, and sharing intimate moments. It was a stark contrast to the daughter he had raised and the values he had instilled in her. It was a betrayal not only of their family's faith, but of the trust they had placed in her. Kwami's heart raced as he scrolled through the phone, feeling a mixture of disbelief, shock, and growing rage. He had always thought of Amma as a bright and respectful child, someone who adhered to the moral principles they had taught her, someone who would one day marry a man and continue their legacy of strong Christian faith. Now, everything was crashing down around him. The images, the texts, the evidence of her secret life, there was no denying it. Amma had defied everything he and Akosua had worked to build. This discovery felt like a punch to the gut, a blow that shook him to his very core. It was at that moment, as he sat there holding the phone, that the gravity of the situation hit him. His daughter, the little girl he had nurtured and prayed over, had become someone unrecognizable. In that moment of fury, Kwame did what, in hindsight, he would regret. In his anger, he picked up his belt. The belt he had used on occasion to discipline his children when they misbehaved. He walked toward Amma's room, feeling a rush of rage and pain. Akosua, who had been in the kitchen preparing dinner, heard the commotion and rushed to intervene. She called out to Kwame, but it was too late. His emotions had already consumed him, and in a fit of anger he burst into Amma's room. Before she could react, her father began to strike her, the belt landing across her back with each swing. She cried out in pain, trying to shield herself, but it only fueled Kwame's anger further. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and his mind, clouded with emotion, couldn't comprehend anything other than the need to punish his daughter for what he perceived as her defiance, her rejection of everything he had taught her. Akosua screamed at him to stop, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of the belt against Amma's body. She tried to pull Kwame away, but the fury in his eyes was uncontrollable. In his anger, Kwame didn't stop. He kept hitting Amma until she collapsed, unconscious. By the time Akosua managed to pull him away, it was too late. Amma had suffered severe trauma. Her injuries were grave, and despite the doctor's best efforts, Amma passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. The discovery of her secret life, the pain, and the shock of the violent confrontation that followed had led to a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Kwami and Akosua's world came crashing down that day. What had started as a quest to guide their daughter in the right direction had ended in irreversible loss. The pain of losing their daughter in such a tragic way was compounded by the realization that they had pushed her too hard, failed to understand her, and allowed their fears to drive them to a breaking point they couldn't return from. The discovery of Amma's secret life had led to a moment of explosive anger, one that ultimately cost her life and tore the family apart. The police began their investigation. The question of what had happened in that room that day became central to the inquiry. Akosua, deeply distraught and emotionally overwhelmed by the sudden loss of her daughter, found herself forced to face the painful reality of the events that had transpired. The police took her statement, and in it, Akosua described how Kwame had acted out of fury, claiming that he had lost control after discovering Amma's secret life. She recounted how he had been angry at her for not adhering to the family's strict values and beliefs, and how, in a fit of rage, he had lashed out in an uncharacteristic outburst. But Akosua's statement also included a difficult truth. She had been unable to stop him. In her panic, she had tried to intervene, but the violence escalated so quickly that there was nothing she could do to prevent it. She had not known the full extent of Amma's relationship with Lily before that moment, and she struggled to understand why it had led to such a tragic outcome. The revelation of Amma's secret life compounded the heartbreak, and Akosua was left questioning everything she thought she knew about her daughter. The police investigation revealed the depth of the emotional and physical abuse that had occurred. Forensics showed that Amma had been struck multiple times across her back and chest, leaving extensive bruising and signs of blunt force trauma. While the initial assumption was that the cause of death was due to the severe beating, the coroner's report confirmed that Amma had died from a combination of internal bleeding and a lack of oxygen, caused by the shock and trauma. The case quickly escalated into a criminal matter, with Kwami arrested on charges of manslaughter. The allegations against him were serious. He was accused of killing his daughter in an act of violent rage, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. For Kwami, the arrest was a devastating blow. He had never imagined that his actions, driven by what he felt was righteous anger over his daughter's perceived rebellion, would result in the death of the person he loved most in the world. But the evidence spoke for itself, and the law could not ignore what had transpired in that room. Kwami was charged with manslaughter, and as the days passed, his once solid faith began to unravel. He found himself in a legal nightmare, fighting to prove his actions were not premeditated, but rather an unfortunate outburst that had tragically spiraled out of control. Akosua, for her part, was torn between her love for her husband and the brutal reality of what had happened to their daughter. She had witnessed the aftermath of Kwami's actions firsthand, and as much as she wanted to defend him, she also knew that the law could not turn a blind eye to the consequences of his rage. She found herself living in a world where grief and fear collided, grief for the loss of her child, and fear for the future of her family, now embroiled in a legal nightmare. The community, too, was divided. On one hand, there were those who believed that Kwami's actions were understandable. After all, he had been a devoted father, a respected member of the Ghanaian immigrant community, and a man of strong faith. Many saw this as a tragic case of a father losing control in a moment of despair, not as a cold-blooded crime. Some felt that Amma had pushed her father too far, that her defiance of their strict values had driven him to the brink. These supporters rallied behind Kwami, expressing sympathy for a man who had lost everything in one devastating act of violence. On the other hand, there were those who saw Kwami's actions as unforgivable. To them, there was no excuse for a father to resort to violence, no matter the provocation. Amma's death was viewed as a consequence of an abusive household where the pressure to conform to rigid religious and cultural norms had left no room for understanding or compassion. To these voices, the situation was clear. The violence had been senseless and preventable, and Kwami's punishment should reflect the gravity of his actions. As the legal proceedings unfolded over the next year, the tension surrounding the case grew. Kwami's defense lawyer argued that his client had acted in a moment of uncontrolled emotion, that the violence was not premeditated, and that he had never intended to cause such harm. The argument centered around the idea that Kwami had been overwhelmed with a sense of loss. First, the loss of his daughter to what he saw as a sinful lifestyle, and then the betrayal of his own authority as a father. He was portrayed as a man who had been driven to the brink by his daughter's secret rebellion, and who, in a tragic moment of weakness, had acted impulsively and violently. However, the prosecution painted a much darker picture of the events. They argued that Kwami had crossed a line, that he had used excessive force to punish Amma for something he did not understand or agree with. The video and texts between Amma and Lily became key evidence in the case, as they revealed not only the nature of Amma's secret life, but also the depth of Kwami's anger and rejection of his daughter's choices. The prosecution contended that there was no justification for the brutal violence that had occurred, and that Kwami had failed as a parent by resorting to physical punishment instead of seeking guidance or understanding. They argued that this was a clear case of domestic violence, and that the punishment needed to fit the severity of the crime. The trial, which began in late 2013, was grueling for everyone involved. For Akosua, the experience was particularly harrowing. She had to face the painful reality of her daughter's death in public courtrooms, recounting the moments that led up to the tragedy. But perhaps the most difficult part was seeing her husband in the dock, someone she had loved and built a life with, now accused of killing their own child. She was torn between the love she had for Kwami and the undeniable facts of the case, and her own guilt over not preventing the violence. As 2014 drew to a close, the jury reached a verdict. Kwami was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, though the charge did not carry the same weight as murder. The judge acknowledged the emotional turmoil that had led to the fatal beating, but he also emphasized that there were no circumstances under which a parent should resort to such extreme violence. The court sentenced Kwami to a reduced prison term of 10 years, taking into account his prior good character and the lack of intent to kill. For Akosua, the verdict offered little comfort. Her family had been shattered, and the weight of grief, both for her daughter and for her husband, was something she would carry for the rest of her life. The legal battle had torn her family apart.
Loved what you saw? Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to join our growing community. Your support keeps us creating.